Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, I want to talk about a possible hot button, hot topic, and that's the increased interest in and the increased prevalence, the diagnostic rates of ADHD, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Now, you might say, why are you combining these two conditions? Couldn't you technically separate these out and not torture me with a 20, 30-minute episode? Yes, indeed. But one, they're already both neurodevelopmental conditions. Neurodevelopment means there's a big genetic backing, and it emerges as the central nervous system unfolds in the individual, right? As someone matures, this is inevitably going to come out. And neurodevelopmental conditions are known to co-occur, so it makes good sense intuitively, conceptually, to include both of them. However, of most particular interest is the public's interest in not just one of them, but both of them at the same time, which we will be getting into quite significantly today. So much so that, the subcategory in here that's not in the title, but we're absolutely going to talk about is circa around 2020, 2021, the community named a new phrase, a new combination of these two diagnoses called AUDHD. AU for autism, A, carry the A to DHD for ADHD. It's the combination of these two conditions. And so clearly there's a lot of interest because that's a thing now. That's a thing in the public sphere. On top of all of this, there is massive provider anecdote over the last several years, myself and others included, that the volume of clientele asking for psychological testing to just talking about concerns about these two conditions at the same time, often with the same individual, has gone up substantially over the last several years. So let's take a look to see if that anecdote holds any weight. And while we're at it, let's look at prevalence rates and the diagnostic rates, which, if you pay attention to any of this, you already know they're going up. So let's talk about it. Now, I'll also offer an opinion, but I've been doing this long enough to know most people don't make it past 2 to 3 minutes, so I'm already right at the end of my time for a lot of my viewers. So I'll do the spoiler on the opinion because the opinion is quite important, and the opinion is not just mine. It is shared by providers across the field and particularly experts in these conditions. And the opinion is a split. It is a dialectic. Two things can be true at the same time. On the one hand, you have increased inclusivity and increased accurate capturing of diagnoses, people who were missed. And on the other end of the fence, we've got concept creep, misinformation, overdiagnosis, and misdiagnosis right there waiting for us. And those both can coexist. I have done these assessments. I know and understand the power of capturing people that were not previously diagnosed. And we know that there's certain populations, most notoriously women, girls, young girls, who do not get accurately diagnosed because there are issues with the diagnostic criteria. And so it is incredibly powerful and important to capture those individuals to make sure they understand, they have self-compassion, they have access to care, whatever it might be. But at the same time, which we will get into, there is this creep in how we define any of this, well beyond what even science has remotely touched, and that has huge societal implications. And so that, in brief, is the opinion. Now, I want to be crystal clear. What we are not talking about is people lying or simulating, or the fancy clinical concept known as malingering, that people are coming in faking something for some secondary gain. Does that exist in society? It exists everywhere. In every possible milieu where people exist, that kind of stuff does happen. But it is a vast minority of people, and that is not what we're talking about here. That is not helpful to this conversation. People are coming in with legitimate concerns, and it behooves us to have these meaningful conversations. I myself have questioned at least once in my life, whether or not I had these conditions. And so let's treat that seriously, right? As frustrating as misinformation can be for us providers, at the end of the day, remember, these are people more often than not legitimately reaching out and expressing concerns. So just getting that out of the way. So let's get to the structure one final time. I kind of already alluded to it, but let me be explicit. Number one, we're going to go into social media data. I'm talking actual data. And heaven forbid, I'm not just going to quote stats at you without telling you about where the stats come from, because holy cow, are we terrible at this on social media. Here's a fancy stat. Don't just scrutinize it at all. I know I'm burning everybody's attention time by getting into these extra details, but by golly, we need to talk about it, especially when we're talking about social media trends. So we'll do social media first, Second up, we'll look at prevalence rates and how we're estimating those prevalence rates and having a conversation around that. Again, scrutinizing a little bit about data sources. And then we'll see how the time is doing, but a recap of the opinion I already offered, as well as some conversation around like thinking about ourselves functionally, heaven forbid, this focusing more on how we function rather than the diagnostic category within which we might fit. So that's the agenda for today. Now, I've got this Word doc up because heaven knows I ain't going to remember all these stats off the top of my head. So let's dig into it. Social media first. Now, the spoiler alert here, because again, I know attention spans are low, and the irony of asking people to pay attention to something for a long period of time. Provider anecdote is absolutely on the money, and we'll roll through 4 different areas that will prove this point. I will strongly use the word prove. One is a YouGov survey. Again, I'll go into what each of these are in a minute. It's a broader look. Look at 2 social media milieus, Reddit and TikTok. Then I myself looked through Google search trend data just to kind of round things out. I want folks to pay attention to the years here, and this is pretty universal to this episode. Something happened in 2020 plus. The dates vary, but everything you will hear is 2020 plus. I mean, there's no more powerful evidence for provider anecdote than that. Everything you see begins to shift post 2020. Now, you know just as well as I do what was going on around 2020. That would be COVID-19. Remember, COVID-19 is for 2019, but remember how it's named. It's based on when it was discovered in 2019. Didn't emerge till March 2020. But, you know, there's a trend. There's absolutely a trend. So pay attention to this. You will notice this recurrently throughout this entire episode, that it has been in the last 5 to 6 years that there has been a meteoric rise. So let's get into the data. So YouGov is the first of the 4 on the social media side. YouGov, let's be abundantly clear, as far as I can tell, is essentially a marketing company, to which you go, why would I trust the data from a marketing company? Well, their product is data, and so it would behoove them to at least be somewhat honest and to represent the data correctly, because if they steer their consumers wrong, the people who pay for the data, they're not going to have a very good business model. So again, grain of salt, obviously. A lot of the methods are behind closed doors, such as the way of for-profit companies. But the best I could find, what they're doing is it's an amalgam of search history, search engines, not just Google, which we'll get into later, but multiple ones across countries, importantly. But also looking at social media things like keyword trends. Now, most of the data I have on ADHD and ASD seem to be more in the search engine realm. I couldn't tell, but just noting they seem to be trying to resource from across the internet, so to speak, which is cool. It's a cool thing. So what they did both of these are identical. And so they seem to be run at the same time. They looked at 24 countries, and the date range was 2019 to 2023. Yes, I know that leaves 3 years out. We'll get into that. But it's a good initial look. We'll talk about ADHD first, then ASD. So ADHD search trends increased in 23 out of the 24 countries, which in of itself is a fascinating statistic. The range of increase was incredibly varied. It went from 44%, which is pretty modest, right, to 952%. 952%. Since most of my viewers are in the United States, if you're just curious, 141% across those 4 years in the United States. If you're sitting there going like, I have to know what was the one country that went down and how much, we're talking about the Philippines. And it only went down 3%. Do I have any insight into this? I have literally zero insight into this. If you're curious who the 952% is, I didn't write that down either. My apologies. I remember going like, really? I don't remember if it was like Poland or something. It's just like fascinating. But here's the first evidence. A pretty significant rise. I mean, anything floating around 100% over 4 years is pretty remarkable. And again, we'll get into the Google Trends data earlier, which will illuminate this beyond this year. This caption of years, even though we're restricting it to Google versus other search engines. Now, importantly, also they noticed what are other terms that are commonly searched along with ADHD. You want to guess what the number one simultaneous typically searched one with ADHD was? It's autism. Autism. Full circle, right, to the dual interest in both. But let's look at autism. Autism, again, Identical 24 countries, 2019 to 2023. The rates of increase were more modest in nature, but still 23 out of 24 countries went up, all the way from 25% increase to 275% increase. So no 900 or 1,000% increase on this list. ADHD definitely is taking the crown, and you will see this throughout all the data, but still a pretty substantial increase. Because again, hundreds of percentages is not small. The United States, again, since a lot of my viewers are here and it's where I live, it went up 75%. Again, pretty reasonable number. The only one that went down, again, if you're curious, but I still have zero insight, is Colombia. It went down 8%. No idea why. No idea why. You want to know what the most commonly duly searched term is with autism? It's not ADHD, but ADHD is the 4th on the list. So it's not number 1, but it was 4th on their list. So again, we see the increase in both provider antidote. It's starting to be supported. And there's overlap in the interest in both of them at the same time, in fact, by the same people. Let's jump over to Reddit. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Reddit, it's basically the next evolution of forums. Forums used to be where people would post about certain topics, and they'd have little subforums, and Reddit's just like a massive forum, and each subforum is called a subreddit. Now, the cool thing about researching this is that subreddits are dedicated to certain topics, ideologies, themes, and diagnoses. There's literally subreddits devoted to diagnoses, including ADHD and autism. And so what this 2025 study looked at, now it's from 2012, so it goes back a little bit further, but then it goes to 2022. Again, we're missing 4 years on this, but by 2022, autism and ADHD became more popular. I don't know if they were using it by number of users or number of posts, but it basically became more popular than depression and anxiety. The most common things that people have for mental health struggles, it eclipsed those two. I want to talk about incident rates of anxiety and depression versus ADHD and autism. I can tell you it's flipped, and yet the communities for ADHD and autism are larger by 2022, and it was not always the way. They also analyzed posts per year in each subreddit, and there's a steady incline, but what you see is in 2018, a very significant slope upwards, and for about 2020, autism also going up. And we're not talking like 100 up, we're talking like thousands to tens of thousands more posts each year, and a sharp incline heading into 2022. And then the final point of interest in this research look at Reddit, significant overlap of users between these two communities. So what this means is a member of one subreddit is also found in the other. They're dual membership in ADHD and autism subreddits. Next up, let's go to TikTok. Now, again, if you're unfamiliar with TikTok, I don't know where you've been living, but it is I don't use TikTok. I'm so sorry. That's going to age me perhaps, but massive media hub. Lots of information, from silly videos to educational videos. I mean, tons of providers are on here trying to give like little terminology and all this sort of stuff. And we're talking, I think it eclipsed the 1 billion users a while back. I mean, that is a heck of a lot of people. Not going to get into the politics behind it and everything, but it is a massive, massive source. So on the ADHD side, we have the more data, which is just the trend. We typically have more data on ADHD stuff than autism. But by 2021, views for ADHD-related content was about 7 billion. By 2026, so here we go, we start getting past that 2023 mark that these last two did, 28 billion. I'm so sorry. It was a 21 billion increase from 2021 to 2026, the views of videos focused on ADHD. You want your first evidence that it continues to go up, and if anything, it goes up in a meteoric fashion over the last several years. Here's your first piece of evidence. Studies from 2022 and 2026 basically went through the content. They were trying to fish out, like, okay, when people are delivering information on these top videos, what of it is relatively accurate to the diagnosis and what could be inaccurate or just not documented in the diagnosis, and it was 50-50. Is what they landed on. Generally, averaging these things together, that was misleading. That these are symptoms being described that have nothing. There's no scientific evidence that they're technically correlated or linked diagnostically to ADHD. And importantly, when they were examining the comments on these videos, tons of users were identifying with those misleading symptoms. Now, the caveat here is sometimes like the correlational things that we notice as human beings ahead of the science, and the science eventually proves ourselves to be true. Yes, that is a thing that does happen. We just talked about way earlier about how, presentations for young girls with autism and ADHD can look a little different. We still haven't fully caught up to the diagnostic criteria. Heck, if we want to predate that, for ADHD, particularly impulsive hyperactive presentations, we understand the symptom list in the diagnostic area does not necessarily match how those things tend to manifest in adulthood. And we still haven't figured out if we want to fix this or codify and make something permanent in that. So I want to name, could some of this misleading stuff technically in the future be like, oh, that was absolutely correct? Yeah, but there's a lot that won't be. There's a lot that won't be. This is a massive contributor to the concept known as concept creep. You take an original idea and you're like, well, maybe this, and maybe this, and maybe this, and eventually it becomes so diffuse, everyone can identify with it. Or if we talk normal curve, right? Suddenly we're getting to the average range at this juncture that we're talking about, which I will get into in the opinion section. All right, so that's ADHD. Let's look at autism now. All right, I took a quick glance. I didn't look as deeply into this. I didn't get the billions of views thing. I probably should have done that. I do know viewership is definitely on the rise. The study I looked at is more about that second point, is like how much of the information being presented is accurate. And it also is saying like 40% could be pretty misleading. Again, caveat, could it be rightfully correlated with the condition? Yes, but it's technically not diagnostic, and some of it, if not a lot of it, represent incorrect concept creep? Oh yeah, you better believe it. So 50% of the information being delivered in the top videos was incorrect or potentially misleading for ADHD, and 40% for autism spectrum, and that ain't a good sign. So that would be TikTok. Last but not least is Google Trends. This is me. I did this myself. You can do this very easily, very quickly. Google Trends, you can look up search history for literally any word, any phrase you want, just out of curiosity. You can do it in specific regions. I compared US to worldwide. Spoiler alert, they're both very similar, so I'm basically clumping the two together. Very convenient for me and for shortening this episode that's already going to be long. But what importantly, I was able to look from 2004 to present. So we're talking over 20 years. And so this increases the span from the other three. I mean, TikTok was pretty recent too, but this just says, all right, final look here. What's the trend way before, some of this research, and then, up to the present day. And we see identical trends. We basically see across 4 separate data sets a similar trend that I already spoke about at the very beginning. 2020 plus is when we're talking. So ADHD, consistent, United States, worldwide, just chilling. Yeah, there's a little tiny miniature ups and downs. And 2020 starts taking off. And I'm not talking like a little bit of takeoff. Whoa, it takes off big time. You want to know when the peak search history based on they give like a score. This isn't like volume, but it's based on a score. You want to know when the peak score is? It's literally right now this year. Autism, consistent. Now, interesting, they had these little spikes. I was like, why is it happening? I think it was like March to April. Why is it like literally you'd see these like significant spikes? You're like, what is that about? Apparently, it's correlated with like when IEPs, 504 plans at school for accommodations are typically coming up around that time. Finals for school, college age, high school, whatever it might be. And so there's just this every year, this recurrence in the same month. Fascinating to observe, fascinating to see. Anyway, besides that little digression, just chilling, doing its little peaks in the March, April, and then boom, 2023, massive increase. The peak actually last year, not so much this year, but still, it's up there. It is right there next to the peak. And so for both of them, immediately you see a shoring up of the TikTok trends of going up, and it bridges that gap. It verifies the 2019 to 2023, 2022 of the Reddit and YouGov, and it even goes before and say, well, maybe we've been here before. Maybe there's been other spikes. No, there haven't. No, there hasn't. This is unique. This is new. This is new. And so provider antidote, absolutely supported. Quick note though, I go, well, I've got this right here at my hands. Let's search for this newly coined, again, for the last 5-6 years, phrase ADHD. Let's see what's going on there. Nothing. Literally zero. Doesn't exist. 2022, boom. Meteoric rise. Sudden, overnight, bam, straight through the roof. Peak year right now, 2026, all the time. It's just nothing. It is insanely common. It is absolutely common. And so once again, not only are we seeing the dual trends for each of them individually, we see the community coined term meteoric rise. Never mind going back to kind of what the YouGov did and looking at commonly co-occurring words in these searches. It's like ADHD treatment and ADHD symptoms. Well, guess what? Each one shows up on each other's search. Autism shows up on ADHD. ADHD shows up on autism. So there you go. So it's here. I mean, it's, if you're a provider watching, yeah. If you're there going like, oh man, am I one of the many who's watching the TikToks and talking about this stuff and seeing these things? Yeah, welcome to the club. Doesn't mean it's wrong, right? Go get checked 100%. I'm not trying to say like you're a dummy for wondering about it. But if you want to know if there's an upward trend, where huge swaths of the society, even worldwide, is interested in this stuff, the answer is yes. Let's check out the prevalence rates. This is more clinically focused. This is diagnostically focused. Let's see where the trends are at. Now, if you've had your thumb on this pulse at all, you already know the answer is, yeah, it's been going up. And let's talk about to what degree. So we're going to start with ADHD. Again, we got more data on ADHD than autism, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it. We'll talk about child and adolescence, because remember, these are neurodevelopmental conditions. These do not magically show up in adulthood, folks. If it's magically shown up in adulthood, it's something else, unless it was kind of a sleeper thing and you're just not noticing it, but it needs to have been present when we are younger. No ifs, ands, or buts to that one. Has to be. So for child and adolescence in the United States, it's up. Again, most people already know this. 1997 to 2016, 6.1% to 10.2%, 4% more. That might seem small, but that's a lot of kiddos. Another one that's just, I was checking for pre-COVID numbers. So there's a little bit of variance on these. Even pre-COVID, it said it was hovering maybe around 8%. So, again, we're not talking massive trends here. It's just like constantly up. You'll notice that 2016, pre-2019 or 2020, right? It goes up and then it kind of floats a little bit before 2020 hits. But then it goes all of a sudden up to 2022. We're up to 11.4%, 7 million of the kiddos. Just out of, curiosity, it's still skewed toward boys versus girls. I think the ratio is still like 4-1 or something. Maybe it went down to 2-1, but still skewed. And the global rates are 5 to 7%. So we already know it's up with the kiddos. The question often is the adults, because while there's a lot of kids coming in and their parents coming in asking about these conditions, the question is this also happening in adults? Are all these trends just a bunch of kids searching this? Answer, no. No, if anything, there is a lot of data that supports the heavily skewed, the increase is heavily skewed towards adults. In the U.S., the estimate is in 2023, 15.5 million. That is 6% of the adult population in the United States, up from, get this, 8.7 million from 2020. That is a massive increase. Oh, cool, we got a tree getting chopped down, if you can hear that, if the noise cancellation ain't coming up. But I ain't about to reshoot this episode, so hopefully it is not too noisy. But 8.7 million to 15.5 million, holy cow, y'all, that is a huge number. Never mind, remember that aforementioned 7 million kids, those kids get older, and ADHD does not disappear magically when you turn into an adult. It sticks around, so it is possible that number will go up as the kiddos age into 18 and above. Of interest, gender in adults, it's actually 1-to-1, male to female is the estimate here. So, which lots of people argue, like, I don't know if this is truly a gendered condition. Something's going up the, how we diagnose the kids. But on the bright side, on the adult side, 1-to-1, which makes pretty decent sense, perhaps. Now, a note on the data. The data for the child and adolescent population is a lot more solid than the adults. So this 15.5% is drawn from a survey, and the survey is a survey of 7,000 individuals across the country. Now, if you know anything about how research is done, it's supposed to be a representative sample. So we're talking about matching the demographics. It's supposed to be sampled from across the United States, so that when you extrapolate and estimate a total prevalence rate, you're doing about the best you can. You've got a good sample size and it is representatively sampled. Now, we just need to name this, though. It's not corroborated by data and diagnostic rates and those sorts of things, because again, we go kind of hands off. Your data is private. We can't look into that information. And so this is people as reported by people, I think over the phone. It might be over the internet. I actually don't know for this one, but we just need to name this. This 15.5 is cited by the CDC. So there should be the CDC, if they're going to, you know, if I'm pausing around this, who works at the CDC anymore? But if the CDC cites it, it's got to be at least somewhat reputable, right? But just kind of note, and I should note too, like that's not an uncommon thing to do, right? Like when you're trying to figure out how prevalent diseases are in, say, like a country where there's not like a good infrastructure for reporting, you sample the best you can so you can estimate these sorts of things. It's real science, but it's apples and oranges. The science and data for kids is far more robust than adults. We just need to name that. And importantly, behind this, there's a separate study I found that said, like, well, you know, how many people think that they have ADHD in adulthood, even if they've not been formally diagnosed? And this, not as robust as the survey, but they did get a sample of 1,000 people. They alleged, I didn't see the specifics on it, but they alleged somewhat representative, and 1 in 4 of their participants thought they might have ADHD. 1 in 4, in the absence of formal diagnosis. Now, I'm not saying of the 7,000 people surveyed in this, 15.5 million estimate, I'm not saying it, people just simulating and lying are like, I think I have it, so I'm going to say yes when I'm called up for this survey. But is it possible? Maybe. Never mind, it's important, corroborating evidence for the social media trends of like 1 in 4 adults in this sample might think that they have ADHD at some point. It's a lot of folks. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Now, I wanted to double check and say, like, okay, is there any other way besides a survey of 7,000 people to understand if rates are definitely on the rise for adults? And what we can look at, full disclaimer, Google helped me with this helped me out with this, is like, you can look at prescription trends and noting a lot of adults with ADHD don't seek prescriptions. So if the number's going up and that is a true statement, we got more evidence. And you already probably know from the expression on my face, if you're watching me and not just listening to me, indeed, the prescription numbers go up from 50 million in 2012 to 80 million in 2022. A 60% increase, 60% of which are adults, and it absolutely corroborates this survey. Prevalence rates are definitely going up for adults. Never mind is social media interest going up. Globally, as a heads up, the adult ADHD population is a little bit lower here than the States, ranging anywhere, the estimates 2.5% to 7%. Let's take a quick gander at autism. Again, not as rigorous as the ADHD side. We already have heard this with the kiddos. 4x increase, 4x increase over the last 2 decades for the kiddos. 1 in 36 by 2020. Now, if you're the misinformation people out there going like, well, I know the reasons, it's there are complicated biological reasons for both of these conditions being on the rise. We do not know them yet. It is probably longitudinally what we are doing to ourselves as human beings, but just as a quick little word of advice, if you're terrified by this episode and you don't want to take Tylenol during pregnancy because you think magically it's going to suddenly arbitrarily cause autism, generally speaking, no. I mean, there is some research that says be careful overusing Tylenol and those sorts of things, but and I'm not providing medical advice when I say this, but I really wish we could have this conversation without getting into conspiracy theories around this sort of stuff. But long story short, it is up. And in adults, really hard to gather this data. Generally speaking, 2.2% maybe of adults might have autism. You're like, wow, that's not much. Well, yeah, remember the adult population's a lot bigger than the kiddo population. That's the 1 in 45. And then I was like, well, okay, I would bet, because this anecdote, this provider anecdote says, you know who the folks are coming in asking about autism? It's not someone with what we call lower functioning, lower kind of scored autism, like the old school defined autism. It's the quote unquote higher functioning scores of 1, if you look at the diagnostic criteria, aka used to be called Asperger's. That's the stuff that people are concerned about coming in as adults, and indeed the data bears that out. Asperger's used to be said globally around like 1% of the population, which is an astronomically low number, and yet there's a hundreds of percentage of increase in this particular population. It's not the lower functioning individuals. We don't see a massive increase in independent living, because lower functioning autism, they are dependents. They often cannot live independently. We don't see a sharp, massive increase in the resources spent on this. We see the sharper increase in incident rates around the Asperger's high functioning autism, which aligns perfectly with the trends that we're seeing as providers. Last but not least, let's talk about comorbidity between the two, because remember, ADHD, it's the whole premise of this episode. There's got to be a little bit of both. How am I doing? 30 minutes? Maybe I'll finish by 40 minutes. I'm so sorry. If you've stuck with me this long, you're amazing. You're the greatest. Thank you for holding your attention this long. Do note, diagnostically, these two conditions were not allowed to be diagnosed at the same time until 2013, at least in our, the diagnostic manual, the DSM. I don't know what the ICD was doing this. The ICD is the more medical diagnostic manual. But it wasn't allowed to be comorbid until 2013. So it would bear to say that there should be an increase in some diagnoses around 2013, because suddenly there's going to be an allowed overlap, and particularly in the realm of autism comorbid with ADHD. Not always the other one in reverse, which the data shows, but just kind of naming that. It's like, was there a meteoric rise back in 2013 when this changed, or at least give it a few years for people to catch up with the changes in the diagnostic manual? Answer, no. No, unless you believe that was a sleeper issue for 7 years and then magically it started going up. No, is the answer. No. But there was allowed to be an overlap between the two, and you're like, wait, why was there not an overlap? Well, if you take a transdiagnostic understanding to neurodevelopmental conditions, they're a bunch of studied phenomenon of functional issues that are then divided into diagnostic categories. But central nervous system development, the development of the brain is not that linear. It does not happen in little diagnostic boxes. So when something goes a little bit awry when it comes to neurodevelopment, it is rare for it to be magically only one domain and one diagnostic, cluster of symptoms is the only thing affected. You tend to see a little bit of a bleed over into other areas, and so it's not uncommon, particularly when you talk about lower functioning autism, traditionally defined autism, that you see other global issues. And I'm talking about literally testing functional cognitive abilities. You see things like attention implicated. And so this often didn't lead to ADHD diagnoses, because this is part of the global pattern that you see with autism. But in 2013, they're like, well, we should probably still be able to name this. This can be a comorbid condition, and it could be clinically important to name it. And so that's, I think, the general idea, but it's kind of hinting at my opinion, is that, these things don't happen in boxes. We make boxes because it's the only way we can correctly identify and treat people. But again, neurodevelopment is not that neat and linear, and that's why there's comorbidity. Anyway, getting to the stats. My apologies if you're like, oh, this guy, he just rambles on. What's the comorbidity of autism with ADHD? So again, ASD is kind of the primary. ADHD is comorbid with it. It's quite high. It's what I was just talking about. 30 to 50% has been some of the estimates, all the way up to 70%. Which again, you're like, at some point, are we just talking about ADHD, or is this just like part and parcel to autism? But when we look at a meta-analytic study, meta-analytic studies are just a fancy way for saying, if you're unfamiliar with them, you collect all sorts of research papers out there. You select for the ones with correct methodologies that fit it, and then you do a comparative analysis, and it's not the technical term, but you compare them, and then you look for what does the data actually say when we, again, this is incorrect terminology, but average them together. That meta-analytic studies had still 40-ish percent, and that is a lot, y'all. Almost a coin flip whether or not someone with autism might have comorbid ADHD. That is significant. If you ever have watched my trauma episode, I think I mentioned, how some estimates of how commonly comorbid depression is with post-traumatic stress disorder. Some say 50% or above, right? it's its own thing. So it's a thing, y'all. But the question is, the usual question is not whether or not someone has full-blown, clearly identified autism and what other neurodevelopmental conditions co-occur with it. What we typically see is like super high-functioning autism with a really big emphasis on ADHD. And so when we look at individuals really strongly diagnosed with ADHD and look for comorbidity around autism, it's quite varied, but the meta-analytic studies around that estimate only about 20%. So is it a thing? Yeah. Does AUDHD, while it's a community-made term, is there merit when it comes to comorbidity studies? Yes. But the concern is the volume of people in social media that seem to be saying both might be skewed towards inaccuracy when we look at the actual prevalence rates. Again, there's arguments around like is the diagnostic criteria too suffocating and is missing some people still to this very day, even after we've increasingly attempted to expand it. Possibly, but still, it's important to note this higher functioning stuff, not like traditional autism with ADHD, comorbidity quite high. The reverse order, not as much. Okay, that is the end of the prevalence rate data. All in all, it's up. So we have, and you'll notice the years also 2020 beyond, particularly the last several years, we're starting to see some pretty significant increases. And you see an identical trend in social media in the public and the diagnostic rates. So, there's this, again, we get to the opinion part 3. There's a friction between these two worlds of like, who is driving which? Are we dangerously being driven by the public, which is, it's informative to science, but if the public opinion rules over scientific opinion, you have a sticky situation at hand? Or is it that as rates go up, the interest in social media and those sorts of things go up? And we have an answer that the latter is not the correct formula, because incident rates have increased in the past and we have never seen such public interest. Now, that does not mean that there's assuredly thousands and thousands of people getting misdiagnosed with these conditions, but the friction is real. There is intense societal pressure for providers to help figure this question out for people, and we are largely ill-equipped to handle that demand. And often when we're ill-equipped, not so reputable services, because it's opportunistic, will fill that void. And this is where misinformation and misdiagnosis can occur, whether it's someone looking for likes, someone who's just venting with an exalted as an armchair expert, or it's just people having to run assessment mills because the demand is so high. Or let's take away have to, they can make a lot of money running assessment mills. We have some friction. And so the opinion bears being repeated. Both can be true. On the one hand, we have increased inclusivity and access to this sort of stuff, and we're capturing people who were previously undiagnosed that should have been diagnosed. I have done these assessments. I have done dozens, if not maybe peaking up into 100 ADHD evaluations in community mental health, where you have massive comorbid conditions that could be replicating ADHD processes. I mean, massive complex trauma, massive issues with TBI or health conditions and all sorts of stuff across the age groups. And there are people that come up and like, this was missed. It's ADHD. Am I 1,000% certain? No. It's a whole other episode on the science behind assessing these things. It's very complicated. It's incredibly complicated doing it retrospectively with adults versus capturing it while someone's still a kid and it's actively unfolding in front of you. But I've done it and I've seen the power. Just as well, I collaborated with a colleague on at least 10, 15, 20 adult autism evaluations because I was not trained in some of the measures, but that's 2 eyes on the same set, and the power of correctly identifying autism. And sometimes the head scratcher moment of like, how was this not caught? There are some real obvious ones. You're like, I don't even know if I need to do a test. This feels so obvious, but let's do the testing. Oh yeah, the testing Barrett says yes too. But the power of that, to name it, even in the absence of intervention for adults, of like, I could have used some intervention when I was younger, but heck, at least now I know what it is. I can be self-understanding. I can belong to community. I can be more compassionate with myself. People trying to force a square peg into a circle hole can be psychologically tasking. And instead, people can healthily say, I will try to do better. I will try to grow in the areas that these diagnoses make more difficult for me, but I'm going to be compassionate, not expect myself to get to a certain threshold that would be unrealistic for me. That dialectical space is just absolute gold for people to thrive as adults. However, are there people who I've assessed that come in and I'm like, it ain't that. And I was doing these assessments before this meteoric rise over the last several years. And so, we're getting into this concept creep where people are coming in and we're like, here are all the correlated symptoms. And we're sitting there going like, I hate to tell you, but those aren't symptoms, right? Those aren't technical symptoms of autism. That's not technical symptoms of ADHD. That could be anything. That could be anxiety. That could be personality. That could be all sorts of like quirks independent of these human-made conditions. And the concept creep is absolutely getting out of hand. And I mentioned this earlier, but I think it really bears repeating how like a very global, very oversimplified, 41 minutes understanding is like everything exists on a normal curve. And usually when we talk about pathology, we're looking outside of this normal curve. We're looking at standard deviations. If most people fall into the 50th percentile, then you get the 25th percentile on either side. So we're getting to the 25th to the 75th percentile. Then you're getting even further. When people are like 2 standard deviations away from the norm, they are in the vast minority of the general population. It is very easy to go, something's up here. Something is quantifiably statistically different. But when concept creep occurs, it reverses that and begins to include criteria and things that more and more people can fit, and you're getting into what was normally understood to be the normal range, the average range of functioning. It dilutes the concept. It dilutes the construct itself. And from that, the ability to discern the difference between things becomes astronomically difficult. Again, is concept creep bred in something genuinely authentic of like, I wonder if we missed a really critical symptom? Yes. But in the hands of the public, this often overcorrects and gets into this nebulous zone where everyone can qualify. When I hear people talk about ADHD, I'm like, I have ADHD then. I don't have ADHD. I'm going to make an episode saying why I don't have ADHD. Does my brain operate a little uniquely? Yeah, maybe, but it ain't ADHD. And so we have to be careful. We really have to be careful. So the final note here, assuming anyone has even stuck around this long, thank you for sticking around for this long. It's like, what's a different way? If I've gone for diagnosis and I wasn't diagnosed, sucks, right? You're like, I thought it was this. They're saying it isn't. Or let's say it's like, I don't even want to get tested, but I do wonder if there's something going on there. You know what the shortcut is? Well, you might misrepresent yourself somewhat if you go to community saying you have a diagnosis that you don't have, so you might miss out on this if you ascribe to this belief. But outside of that, it can still be very validating to think of yourself functionally. That if there's an area of difficulty for you, that can exist as its own truth independent of diagnosis. I have tons of sensitivity issues, emotionally and sensory too. My wife complains about this. Well, complains is a strong word. She sometimes will complain. She's like, you and touch have an interesting relationship. But meanwhile, where she's much more compassionate, it sounds so bad. She definitely leads with compassion. Is like, in public, I have a real hard time. I have my better times. I'm like, I'm okay. Other times, everything is stimulating me, and I cannot focus in it. I begin to be overwhelmed. And if you look at social media, people are like, that's autism, right? And it's like, could that be correlated to the condition? Yes. Is it unique? Is it specific to the condition? We don't know. But if I was to say, well, I have social anxiety and social awkwardness my entire life, I seem to get in my own way, blah, 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 I'll have a whole episode on this. I could technically be like, ooh, maybe I have autism because of concept creep. And instead I could just go, well, I know I have this functional problem, so how do I understand it the best I can, which is a start point, but at the end of the day, I have to figure out how to manage it. It's a real thing. So what do I do? What do I do with the emotional sensitivity? What do I do with sensory sensitivity? What do I do, right? I have to answer these questions for myself, and I can. And if I went to therapy for these things, they could help me. If I have attention and memory problems because of TBI, guess what's helpful? ADHD recommendations because of memory and attention issues. It's because we're talking functionally, not diagnostically. Again, there's power in the diagnosis. Don't mishear me. But if you find yourself in a lurch and you're like, well, if I don't have the diagnosis, I'm screwed. Au contraire. Talk to, if you have providers, or work through yourself of like, what do I do with this functional problem? And then just follow wherever the functioning is. Well, let's try this. It's technically made for this other condition, but I can try it because it's alleging to help with this functional area that's difficult for me. Give it a go. That's amazing. That's so cool that we can do that. I know it can be invalidating. I know it'd be nice to be like, well, I have this diagnosis. And things like ADHD, if you don't have the diagnosis, getting access to medication is a thing. Sure. I get it. But if in case that's helpful at all, just think functionally. What are the most difficult functional domains for me, independent of diagnosis, and how do I address those functional domains? What does that look like? Do I need help? Self-help book? Do I Google this stuff? What is it? Do I look up research articles? Whatever it is. That can be very empowering just as well. It's what I do with myself too, although I also have my own conditions, I think, too, diagnosable conditions. So, all right, I need to end this. Oh my gosh, 46 minutes. It's a long one, but it's an important one. So again, I'll have timestamps. I hope those timestamps are helpful. You can always come back, watch, listen to any of it. But it's a big deal, right? Everything's on the uprise, and we have to figure out what to do with these things. I hope the data has been interesting. I hope the deeper dives into how the data was collected and where the data come from was also at least illuminating, if not models what we should be doing more of in this world. To scrutinize where data come from. But long story short, thank you so much for listening and or watching. And as always, and do note, I've said this, but I should say it one final time. I'm hoping to have 2 episodes about self-diagnosing ADHD and autism. Spoiler alert, I'm not actually diagnosing myself, nor am I trying to help you diagnose yourself as a non-professional if you are not a professional, but just so you can, as an outsider looking in, me taking some very readily public domain screeners and how easy it can be to say yes and how the devil is truly in the details. Those are episodes I have coming up, bridging off of this episode. So my apologies. I will get back to it. Thank you for listening, watching, and stay curious.